Hi guys, and welcome to my video where I'll be taking you through my new Windows PC. The primary use of this PC will be general everyday use, web browsing, watching movies and YouTube videos, and light video and photo editing. This is not a gaming PC, well, at least not yet, not until I put a good graphics card in it, which I do plan to do in the future when I have enough money to spare. So let me take you through all the parts that I've used in this computer, and I'll also talk a little bit about why I chose that particular part. So let's get started. For the CPU, we'll be going with the Intel Core i5 4670K. Now this is a 4th generation Haswell processor from Intel and has 4 physical cores and 8 threads. The K in the name of the CPU means that it has an unlocked multiplier and is therefore favorable to overclocking. Overall, I think this is a very powerful CPU and should provide enough horsepower for many years to come. For the motherboard, we'll be using the Gigabyte GA B85M D3H. The B85M D3H is a micro ATX motherboard that supports the Intel LGA 1150 socket for the 4th generation Intel Haswell CPUs and can accommodate a maximum of 32 GB of RAM as one stick of 8 GB in each of the 4 RAM slots. It also has a couple of USB 3 ports and internal USB 3 headers for the front panel of the case. There is an HDMI out port as well to connect to the monitor, which I will be needing as I will not be using a dedicated graphics card for this build. This motherboard also has 4 SATA 3 6 gigabits per second ports, one of which I will be using to connect the solid state drive. Alright, so for the RAM, we'll be using a single 8 GB stick of Corsair Value Select RAM. Now, although the motherboard that I'm using for this build has 4 slots and it can take a maximum of 32 GB of RAM, instead of buying 2 4 GB sticks, I thought I might as well buy a single stick of 8 GB because the price difference between the two was not much. For the case, I'll be using the Bitfinex Prodigy M. The Prodigy M from Bitfinex is a relatively compact case and accepts both micro ATX and mini ITX motherboards. One of the main reasons why I chose this case was that I wanted something very small and compact. As I would be placing this case on top of my desk, I would not want it to take up much space. However, the width of the case really surprised me when I unboxed it for the first time. Although the height of the case is perfect, I found the Prodigy M to be a little too wide and thick for my liking, which in turn increases the overall footprint of this case ever so slightly, so you would definitely want to keep that in mind before purchasing one for yourself. Another reason why I prefer this case is that it has a very understated and sophisticated look and is not very flashy. So for the power supply, we'll be going with a Corsair CX750 power supply. Now this is a 750 watt power supply and it is 80 plus bronze certified. Now some of you might be thinking that for this kind of a system where I'm not even putting a graphics card, this power supply might be overkill. But the thing is, I bought this power supply keeping my future requirements in mind because I might want to add a dedicated GPU sometime in the future. Now this power supply is unfortunately not modular. What that means is that these cables over here are fixed and attached to the power supply, so I can't really remove them, and that would require some aggressive cable management inside the case. Now at its longest end, this power supply measures 160 millimeters, which in fact is the longest power supply that this particular Bitfinex case can accommodate. Now I didn't know that before ordering the case, so I was lucky in some ways that this power supply will fit just about right. For storage, we'll be using a solid state drive. Now I chose the Plextor M5S SSD over the other brands like Kingston and Samsung because the price per gigabyte for this 256 gigabyte model was the cheapest compared to the other brands. I've also used this exact same SSD before while replacing the traditional spinning hard drive on my laptop, and I was extremely impressed by its performance. SSDs are light years faster than traditional spinning hard drives, are very tough and durable, and make your computer very fast and snappy, as well as providing slightly better battery life if you're installing it in a laptop computer. Now if you've never used an SSD, I strongly recommend that you make the switch. Now the prices have fallen significantly over the last few years. To connect to the internet, we'll be using a TP-Link PCI Wi-Fi card. I could have just used an Ethernet cable from my router to my PC, but the problem is my router is located very far from the room in which I plan to keep this PC, and even if I were able to somehow attach an Ethernet cable, I would still prefer to go wireless, even if it means slightly reduced speeds, as I don't like cables hanging around everywhere and it just spoils the aesthetic. Another option was using a USB dongle Wi-Fi adapter, but then that again would be hanging from a USB port on the back of the PC, and I just prefer the internal solution that the PCI cards offer. To keep the CPU running cool and quiet, we'll be using the Arctic Silver 5 thermal compound. Now the CPU cooler already comes with some thermal compound pre-applied, but the Arctic Silver 5 would give us much better performance and heat conductivity. Basically what a thermal compound does is it transfers the heat generated by the CPU to the CPU cooler and heatsink, and in turn keeps the CPU cool. For the keyboard and mouse, we have the Dell KM713 wireless keyboard and mouse kit. Again, I went for a wireless keyboard and mouse as opposed to wired ones, as I really don't like cable and wires to be visible, and I prefer a clean and uncluttered look. And finally, we'll also be needing a DVD drive to install a new copy of Windows. And finally, I'll leave you with some benchmarks of the solid state drive and of the Windows Experience Index, so you can have a little idea of how the computer performs. So this is what the setup finally looks like. I know it looks a little messy right now with all the wires hanging around, but I promise you that I'll take care of it very soon, and I'll route all the cables and wires through the back of the desk. I forgot to talk about the monitor that I'm using here. Now this is a BenQ monitor, model number GL2650HM, and it's a fairly decent monitor, not the best, but for a budget setup I think it works quite well. The blacks on it are not as deep as they should be, they're more like grayish. But other than that, I think it's fairly decent for the price.